especially in CAMCA and many developing markets where we work, is that in order to attract Western business, things have to seem fast and easy. If things were easy, we always say somebody would have already done it, right? No one, certainly in our company, expects immediate and open-armed acceptance of new financial structures and business concepts. You know, if a company expects that, you should probably stay away from them because they're selling something. You just have to be realistic and set expectations. So here's an example. We do a lot of work in Kazakhstan. We spent a year on a certain project in a certain city assembling a pretty complicated financial structure. This effectively required a government entity to put up some cash collateral in order to secure the loan. We spent months, we signed documents, the lender was told this money existed, and it turned out ultimately that this government entity was trying to raise the money from other internal sources. Simply explaining that they either needed more time or were working on an internal syndication would have been very helpful, but unfortunately the situation that evolved was an erosion of trust and there were some difficulties. So the political will here to push forward economic reform and attract FDI, it's enticing and it's present. I mean, that's why we're in the room. But the worst thing to do is give false deadlines or unrealistic ones out of a sense of anxiety that you need to provide immediate solutions to problems. So 2, be consistent. This is also important. Private sector actors love consistency, right? And oftentimes, consistency simply manifests as a reliable point of contact or a counterparty in a transaction. So we've been roundly impressed by the skill and capability and work ethic of the Uzbek government employees with whom we've worked. This has never been the issue. The problem is that we've seen often too frequent changes in these points of contact. So our conversations in Uzbekistan, we think, could have moved substantially more quickly if we'd been put in contact with the right counterparties to begin with. It's very difficult to move a deal forward if the person you think you're talking to who's in charge turns out not to be, suggests someone new, and then continues to pass things along. This area in Kazakhstan, for example, really impressed us. In fact, we were put in touch years ago with a government counterparty who was not only excellent at his job, but was consistent throughout the process. And he was so good, in fact, that after we'd completed a phase of that project, we talked with his government employers and he's now working with us. Everybody wins, everybody's happy. Phase of the deal got done, it's terrific. So what are the simple recommendations? Understand internally exactly who's responsible for certain decisions and make clear the hierarchy and reporting lines. Show us a structure chart, something simple. 2, lists of name, titles, and contact details for people on a deal team. We call them working group lists. It's very simple. And the clear communication on process. What are we supposed to do to get to answers, to get to certain documentation? That dovetails with the 3rd point, which is responsiveness. So obviously, good communication is an important thing, but much of the private sector has extremely strict procedures when it comes to compliance. No surprise. These are especially robust for American companies like ours, and particularly in countries like Uzbekistan. So we like memos, we like email. Email provides a type of written record that we can use to prove we're following the rules. So in jurisdictions like Uzbekistan, we have to keep meticulous records. And I realize there are cultural differences about style and method of communication. Telegram, WhatsApp, it's different. But I'll tell you this, simple responses to messages like thanks, well received, we'll talk to X person, get back to you in 3 days. This kind of stuff goes a long way, trust me, and it's important. This is an area I have to note where senior government officials in Uzbekistan have been extremely impressive. In fact, the most honest, supportive, responsive, and transparent relationship I've had with any embassy anywhere is with the Uzbek embassy in Washington. And it's true. And similarly, several senior members of the Ministry of Investments and Foreign Trade, I didn't know I'd be sitting next to Laziz when I said that, have been committed, responsive, and creative thinking partners throughout our time here. It's very important. You don't always see that at a very senior level. Our experience elsewhere has been a little bit mixed. We've gone weeks, sometimes months in other countries without basic acknowledgments of things as simple as, can we have a weekly phone call? There's no faster way to lose a chance for FDI than ignoring someone when they're asking you how they can invest money in your country. So in closing, I hasten to add here that these recommendations are meant as advice to enhance what's obviously an extremely positive experience, because if it weren't, I wouldn't be sitting here and nobody would be in this room. Our goal here is to help the region continue to develop a collaboration to bring in investment. Just keep it in the backs of your heads when you're dealing with Europeans, especially Americans. Little things can go a long way with us. So, thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you, Michael. Perfect. I forgot to mention at the beginning that all of the speakers here today have extensive experience in investment, and they could go on for hours. And I'm limiting them here because we have a time constraint. But if you want more detail, see them after this meeting because they've got a lot to tell you. Irakli, Alasania, you've seen investment decisions from government and from the private sector.
Sure.
What works and what should be avoided?
First of all, it's a really pleasure to be at this podium and go ahead and compliment Michael, saying that we've been very fortunate to have such a counterpart from the Ministry of Investment as Laziz, because really it's our second time principio and SP in Uzbekistan, and we've been treated really with the rapid reactions on our requests, so thank you for that. And it's a wonderful, and it's a it's a pleasure to be here. First of all, I'll start from saying that Uzbekistan really got the attention of the world. It's very hard to do it because there's so many things happening, and I remember when Georgia was transforming in 2003, 4. Oh, thank you. So it was really hard to get the attention of investments and investors. So you got at the point when the whole world is watching, but now we have to deliver. And that's the most important part you have to remember. And you have to deliver in very concrete terms. First of all, I'm going to follow up and echo Michael was saying that it is important to have very clearly defined rules of the game. Because when investors are coming in, they need to have predictability. They need to know what's next, who's the actor, and of course, what's most importantly, the tax reform should be very simple and clear. And this is what you're working on. We've talked about this with the various actors here, and it's really impressive how much goodwill is there. But you should have to deliver, because as fast you can get it attention, as much fast you can lose this attention. So this is one of the most important things for the investors that we've learned from our own experience. Second, of course, you touched upon this in the regional cooperation. On tariffs, on cross-border goods and services transfer, this is so impressive what you've done with Tajikistan in this past year, and you work with other regional countries. And this is very important for us as well as from the investor standpoint to see that there is kind of understanding among the countries that what do you need to attract investors, but also how to protect them and how to have the clarity in the mission they want to accomplish on the ground. Also, I don't want to avoid the very important thing, which is that you need to get the strategic investors from the West, because they bring the corporate culture that has never been in this region, in CAMCA region before. And this is where you learn how to be cooperative with the Western investors. This is how you really feel how the rules of the game should be set. And this is also depending on you, but also from the political understanding of the countries that want to help you, like United States, European Union, and to say that they should grab this opportunity that now Uzbekistan presents, not only for the Uzbekistan, but also for the whole region. This is the opening. And the Western communities and the European Union, and mainly United States, has to understand that this opportunity should not be passed away. Also, what is very important, and Laziz is one of the representatives of the civil service that you would like to see in the country that you want to invest. But there's also should be special attention paid, because you can't have just a few or several good English-speaking, understanding officials in the bureaucracy. You have to create the civil bureaucracy school. That's what we did in Georgia, and it paid back. Definitely, it's very important also to have you fighting corruption, but we have to have the qualifying standards for the civil service. We have to admit the CAMCA countries we're infected with tribalism. We'd like to have our relatives, cousins around us because they cheer up our ego, but at the end of the day, they really screw up things. So when the solution is very simple. Set the standards of qualification, and your cousin will come, you said, okay, go ahead and apply. If he's qualifying, that's good. If it's not, most of the cases they won't. So you're not gonna be blamed, and no one will be wiser. So this is really very important issue for you to understand, because this is coming from the kind of experience we have in Georgia. Transforming the law enforcement and intelligence service is also one thing. You have, in a region like this, and like Georgia as well, you have to have very strong law enforcement and intelligence, but they have to be fully isolated from the decision making and the business. And also, it's step by step, they have to be depolitized. So this is one of the issues that we are still grappling in Georgia, because it's hard to do, but you have to have the goal to do this. Expectations. People and public in general, you have to inform public what you're doing and why you're doing this. Because reforms sometimes is hard and you don't see that results that fast, because that's the way it is. But you have to furnish the public with the information about why you're doing this and why this will benefit the simple population who are waiting for the results of your governance. So this is important to always keep in touch with the public to explain why the hard reforms are happening, why some people will lose their jobs, because you're trying to create the real jobs, not the only government jobs. So this is important to keep them actually checked and informed. I talked a little bit about the, we just had the meeting with the Ministry of Education, and we see that there's 60% of population is young. And this is important to have a lot of emphasis on the education. And you're doing this. And we are also trying to help to bring US and other educational investors here. This is very important to keep in mind, that the future is on the young population and generation. And they change the old habits, which we all had during the Soviet Union. It requires generational change. And you have to prepare the new generation to be compatible and to have this kind of tools that will be required to lead the prosperous Uzbekistan. So these are some of my kind of findings that comes from the kind of experience that we have in Georgia, and probably we'll do more talks after the question and answer session. Thank you.
Thank you, Irakli.
For those who haven't seen me around at this point, I'm actually a banker with about 20 years of experience in the region, mainly on natural resources transactions. But what I want to focus on today is the need to diversify beyond natural resources. I have a statistic that in Central Asia, the overall FDI potential is estimated at about $170 billion over the next 10 years, of which I'm glad to say about 40 to 70 billion is in non-extractive industries. And I think that there are a lot of ways these economies can diversify beyond what their current situation. So the focus of capital investment will not just be into using the countries as a gas can, as it were. I very much want to echo the words that Laziz said about increasing infrastructure, increasing trade ties, because when you look at these economies, they actually are very complementary towards each other. If you look at Kazakhstan, yes, natural resources, but also large space, agriculture in terms of grain. When you look at Uzbekistan, you have small, mid-sized enterprises, light manufacturing. I think it's fair to say that in Kazakhstan, the experience is far more long-term in terms of developing capital markets. We have organizations like the Astana International Financial Center and the Astana International Exchange, who will be speaking later today. And they're focused, I think, as a point of entry for capital markets for the region. It can be a very useful point to help fuel and bring along the growth and development in Uzbekistan over the years.
Thank you.
For those who understand baseball, I'm not only a pinch hitter here, but I'm a cleanup hitter. So a lot of the things I was saying have been said another way, but I'm a corporate and finance lawyer, so I'll look at it that way. What I do know as a corporate and finance lawyer on Wall Street for 40 years, capital wants certainty. They want certainty of the structures in which they are working, legal and political, because they're willing to take the business risk, but not the risk of the uncertainty in the political and regulatory structures. So first of all is rule of law. The rule of law has to be certain, and they know, and of those, solid corporate law. So managers and investors know what their liabilities are, and they're protected by the structure in which they invest. They know they'll invest so much, that's all they can lose. They will not have personal liability. The independent courts enforcing those laws. Sanctity of contracts is very important. And in many cases, in countries or economies are just taking off, the courts takes a while to build independent courts, so you need intelligent government regulators who will enforce the legal structure, but in a uniform way, into which lawyers can work with them and argue in an open way the law. You need understandable precedents in doing that. In order to, in a country in which they are just developing their law, you may have to borrow from another country. Hong Kong still use UK precedents. They use UK precedents which have been going on for centuries and developed over the years, and very, very useful that way. There's no shame in one country adopting another's tax regime. You need to have tax certainty. I was involved in a $3 billion offshore gas development, offshore Israel, well developed. We were about to go and make a commitment to it, and all of a sudden Israel said, oh no, we have to change the tax structure here. We haven't had a tax structure in the gas area, offshore gas area. Held up for a year. Netanyahu argued at the Supreme Court. He lost, had to restructure it. But until that tax regime is certain, you're not going to have a major investment, even in that kind of an advanced country. Accounting rules, again, you want to have certainty and uniformity, particularly for public companies. If you're going to have a public market, the accounting rules have to be uniform and well known, so when people take a look at the bottom line, they know what that bottom line means. Labor regime. Workers need to be protected, but they cannot be onerous on capital and have to be flexible. Exit strategy. Exit, how do you, when a company or an individual puts capital into an enterprise, they want to know how they get their profit out. They do not expect the capital to remain there forever, so they need to know what kind of a market exists. Is there a public market, or are there parties that would buy them out? The enterprise goes forward for the benefit of the country, but the investor wants to be sure that there are good exit strategies. And in an economy that's really starting to take off, those exit strategies are uncertain. The more they can be fixed, the better. Finally, for all this, you need good professionals, lawyers, accountants, and investment bankers. Where do they come from? Often they come from other countries who understand the new structures are being set up and are professionals and set up firms and train lawyers locally who then become the lawyers or the accountants of the future in the country.
Thank you, Ed. Everyone was extremely efficient. We're going to have time to go down again. I'd like to just go down the line, starting with you, Laziz, to tell me what you heard. How do you reflect on some of the things the others have said? And I'd like to put one question out of my own. I heard from several people. Michael, you started it, and Irakli, you picked it up, which was defining the rules of the game. Where does that happen? Who defines the rules of the game in a way that can be communicated effectively to investors? Is it a ministry? Is it executive authority? I mean, how does that happen in your experience? So, Laziz, we'll start with you.
Thank you very much to all the speakers, to your comments and recommendations. Of course, all of them are under the measures. We take them into account. We currently work on each topic you have mentioned. Of course, we need time to make the government more efficient, to have an effective strategy on attracting of foreign direct investments. All of you perfectly understand that Uzbekistan was a part of another system for 70 years, and the majority of the public company managers, they have a different mindset, they have a different education background. So the task is now to train a new generation of managers, public servants who are consistent with international requirements and standards in terms of not only management but standards that consistent with market-based economy principles. And that is why the priority attention is given to the education. You rightly mentioned that education is crucial here, and not everything was successful in Uzbekistan during the years of independence. And we see clearly our weak spots now in terms of education. And the new president has initiated concrete steps, which includes the start of education as early as 2-3 years old. So we have established a new Ministry of Preschool Education, and we want to make sure that every kid start to learn not from 6-7 years, not from the school, but before that. We have also made compulsory for our kids to learn English. This is a must for all the kids, and we are covering that now with all the schools that are in Uzbekistan. A lot was mentioned about the rule of law, independence of the legal system, judicial system. This is crucial for sustainable development, not only to attract investments, but to have a sustainable development of the country itself. And with the support of international organizations, including the World Bank, IMF, variety of different other our partners and friends, we are working on each direction, in each sector, social sector, law, economy, fiscal, banking, and etc. And the strategy that we have, the strategy for development for 2017-2021, it includes all the aspects of life of ordinary people. And we believe that by 2021, Uzbekistan will achieve certain results that will make our country different from what it was a year or 2 years ago. In terms of investment, our strategy is to not only to attract financial resources. Uzbekistan itself is self-sufficient in terms of the money, if we can say that. What we need when we attract investors is first modern management skills. I mentioned that the current managers for the majority of the public companies are not correspond to the expectations. And apart from that, we are also looking for technologies that will allow our economy to be more competitive and sustainable in the long term. So yes, all the topics all the speakers have mentioned are crucial and important for us, and I am sure that the reforms and measures that are taken by the government will deliver the specific results in midterm.
Thank you. Michael Sellman.
Thanks very much. And Laziz, we appreciate that. As I said in my canned remarks, you really have been a wonderful partner. There are these extraordinary high points along the way in terms of collaboration. One of the themes that we picked up on, based on the nature of our business, is the notion of education and skilled labor. I mean, everyone knows the obvious. Uzbekistan's the largest population in the region. The majority of it is young. But in addition to training and educating a civil service, there are many lower skilled but still skilled jobs that are critically important to any development that's going to come this way. And I think the notion of that education goes hand in glove with what we're doing. So we're a real estate company. We have a modular, affordable housing construction process. We build these units in a factory, we ship them to a site, and we erect them, right? There's no instruction manual for that. When we start the work here, we're going to need thousands of people to help build, help assemble these units, move them, and then put them up on certain construction sites. That takes training, right? And I think one important thing that I've picked up on in the comments here is a collaboration with the government in articulating, especially to the regions, that FDI is not Calatrava Grace from America coming in to take the business away from you you've been doing for 50 years. It's rather a partnership that will teach the workforce how to do something maybe you're doing a little bit better, or at least a little bit differently, maybe more efficiently, maybe a new management skill. I think that could come off quite well. There's all sorts of ways to approach profitability, a profit share and a program that could roll out nationwide. All of these ideas are, I think, important in the way they're articulated so that FDI is not viewed as an ominous competitive threat, but more an enhancement across all levels of the labor chain. And obviously education is a theme. So that's something we can continue to talk about that I think is very important.
Well, I would just shortly add and emphasize again how important it is for the foreign political leadership to understand the opportunity that presents itself to Uzbekistan for the whole region. And I would advise your president himself to work the phone, so to say, and explain to the foreign leaders, especially in the European Union and United States, that he needs help, he needs support. And transforming the post-Soviet state and the country and actually modernize the nation, it's a lot of effort, and
it's going to be very hard to do it on himself. And we understand how tough it is also to transform the corrupt practices that were in place. So I think one of the most important things we also, as potential investors, going back to our countries, to raise the awareness that is really a huge opportunity here for a region. And we need to help this country and these countries. And because if we're not going to lend the money, if we're not going to bring the corporate culture that comes from the West, then these countries will be more leaning to get the predatory investors that are all around. They're flashing money. They're coming in. We're not giving the practices that this country needs to move forward. So I think this is, we all talk about, and we're advising Laziz and others how they should do things. That's absolutely correct. And the honest assessment of Michael was up to the point. But we also have to understand that it works both ways. And we have to do our job actually to educate our political leadership in the West. This is the time. If we want to help this country and the region, if we want this country to develop in the right direction, we need political help to be lended. And I'm going to just recollect how we, and you were involved in that, Baku Tbilisi Ceyhan. The people were laughing at us that it's not going to materialize. I mean, who will allow this? Russia would never allow this to do. But there was a political support from Washington and the countries from the Europe that made it happen, and then other strategic investors followed it. Thank you.
I'm going to make a short point and sort of get away a little bit from the political area, although that's hard because I am partially a political scientist by background. So, but I want to focus more on not just government, but the role of market participants and their behaviors, practices that are common in these markets as a way to bring in foreign investors. I think that's very important. We all remember the 1990s and a lot of different behaviors, mainly in Russia. I think we saw a lot of difficult tactics, but it's been throughout the region as a whole over time. Even today, I sort of sometimes feel like we're going through a cycle where there are things that I see sometimes that are reminiscent of that time period that's coming back, which actually gives me hope that we have better times ahead again. I work in a market that is arguably overbanked. In Kazakhstan, I think we have something like 60, 70 financial institutions, of which I consider about 5 to 10 to be really strong going forward, and I'm glad to say I think that we're one of them. The investment banking business is actually rather competitive. Margins are low. I'm not going to ask for sympathy from the audience for our investment bankers, but it's not a normal structure, and it's not a normal situation, and it's very cutthroat. In Europe, I think the closest example would be the European Venture Capital Association, which has rules and best practices, and sort of very much is a model throughout the world for emerging markets that are setting up private equity and institutions as well. So adhering to best practices, and it has to go from the ground up as well as from the top down.
Cox, you're cleaning up again.
Anders, I think your question really was, how do you assure that there's going to be a rule of law, a good tax regime that doesn't change, consistent accounting rules, etc. And the fact is there's no absolute answer to that. You can have a strong presidency, but presidents change. It depends upon the individual. You can have a strong congressional or parliamentary system, but in the Israeli situation, the Supreme Court of Israel, contrary to Netanyahu's arguing before them, and they decided one Knesset cannot control the next elected Knesset, and if it wants to, it can change the rules on you, can change the tax regime. So I would go back to the culture. You need to have a pro-business culture, a culture of fairness, a culture of transparency in the decision-making process, so everyone knows what's going on and how it's going on, and it's not just depend upon telephone justice or one individual here or there making a decision. But you have that transparency in the governance process and a culture that doesn't mind people making a profit. If you take a look at China, it took off when Mr. Deng Xiaoping said, it's glorious to be rich. What a change from the Mao. But when the leader said that, China started taking off then. So it's more a question of the culture in the end.
Thank you. We've had several good rounds. We'll open it up to you. Questions from the audience, right here. Please identify yourself. Do we have another microphone? Here we go, right here.
Hello.
Can address
Yes, actually, I can address this question to all the panel. What we learned now from your speech that there is let's say, shortcomings of like political, corporate, legal, tax systems does affect negatively FDI's flow. Then some countries in CAMCA region, right, they practice like to compensate maybe for that, tax breaks, certain preferences for foreign investment, etc., still to attract even with the current situation. So what do you think, at what degree or to what extent those practices are effective? Thank you.
Ed, we'll start with you and we'll work back this way.
Yes, you do need to jumpstart the process somehow, although you've been very successful in building your chain of stores, I know, going forward, the way you've done that without having a real banking system and other things to work within. So if you give preferences to a foreign investor in order to attract them, maybe in certain areas where you do have comparative advantage and you know that you need to build a critical mass, but it can't be just for one company or one individual investor. It needs to be uniform. This is our regime in this area, and it lasts for a certain period of time, and then those tax preferences, and particularly as is done in the tax area, they go away.
It's a very complicated question. It's very interesting. I mean, I'm going to speak to my experience in the oil and gas industry, where I know I've worked with several oil companies investing in the region. And every production sharing agreement, which is signed between government and an operator, includes elements of investment into the country. The company is called CSR type of investment. And there should be a tangible way of measuring it and showing both to the legislators and to the government as well as to the public about what the benefits are for the country that are coming out of that type of investment. Irakli mentioned the BTC project between Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Turkey, and that I think is one of the most successful in terms of demonstrating to the public what was ongoing, because BP had a website where they talked about social interaction on almost a daily basis, updating it while the pipeline was being built. But it's a question of something that needs to be done and both shown and not be a type of greenwash, but actually have tangible economic effects, or that people in the country are not going to appreciate it. One area which I'm hoping to work on more in Kazakhstan is to look at the effects of investment in the projects and see how we can help to develop the local industry more and more, and I think that's something that can be replicated throughout the Central Asian region.
I'm just going to add that I'm not a fan of giving privileges or just some exclusive rights to any of even foreign or local investors. I mean, I think what really pays back is to have just a simple, clear rules for everybody. But I understand we're in transformation and you need to support some of the neglected industries. And in this case, in Georgia, for example, for past 4 or 5 years, the agricultural sector was pulled up by the special incentives from the government. Actually, we had special fund that was still there, helping the agro to start and up and running. So yeah, it's individually in each sector that the government or you need to be looking at, but in general, it's to have the set rules for everybody.
Michael.
I agree with what's been stated here. The question about, to what degree does the existence of these reforms and programs help? And I don't want my remarks or anyone's here, I don't think, to cast a shade on the environment here. As I said, we're here because it's interesting. The mere existence of a lot of these programs is enough to get at least our company interested. I mean, I've been amazed by the efficiency of certain processes. We registered a local entity in the Navoy region within 10 days. The free economic zone there is extraordinarily robust. It even treats VAT in different ways than across the region. In Kazakhstan, it's substantially more complicated to understand the tax regime, we have found. Laziz mentioned currency repatriations and repatriations of funds. Excellent work and clarity on that. I think there's a lot of progress made. Enhancing what's been put in place is critical, but you have the ingredients there in practice that have brought players like this to the table. So just that they exist is enough to get people interested.
Yeah, very good question, Mr. Hashimov. In the past, Uzbekistan used to provide specific tax holidays for certain companies. That practice showed that was not sufficient, that led to disproportions in the economy, ruined the competitiveness in certain areas and sectors. That is why the position of the new government and our principle is to develop a sectoral package of preferences that would apply to all the players in that certain sector or industry. This is the main principle we would like to continue on, and we gave up the mechanism of signing the individual investment agreements between certain investor and the government. Our idea is to have a unified system which can enhance and support the development of competitive environment.
Other questions? Way in the back, right there. Please identify yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. Batyr Arifjanov, the IT entrepreneur. Among many other problems which are facing in the development process in our country, we are seeing a lack of capital, lack of investment, mainly in different spheres. But since I'm coming from the IT industry, I'd like to talk about the lack of venture capital, VC financing, due to many reasons. First of all, the lack of the funds, funds which are easily available from the local market. This is problem number one. And I guess the main problem is another thing, which is lack of experience of local investors to invest in the form of the venture. They don't understand the concept, they don't understand the culture, they don't know that there is a risk associated with it and higher risk, higher return kind of combinations. So in order to help for the boosting this sector of economy, do you think the international community, I mean, like in this case, like the US, which is far more advanced in this regard, could help bringing some assistance in the forming like local funds, especially dedicated for IT venture financing, and give some boost for this industry? Thank you.
I can actually comment on this from personal experience, but because I've been assisting people in a team that has been working to develop exactly this type of fund, investing in these types of businesses. And from the investor side, even if you have experience in the market, the problem is convincing the LPs. I mean, at current stage, private capital is probably not ready to come in large numbers to invest in small and mid-sized enterprises in Uzbekistan. They need some time, they need to get used to it. We're 2 years into the change of a process here. So the logical source is DFIs. You know the names, and starting with the World Bank and working on down. And they themselves are taking their time to figure out where it's going. I have a feeling this capital wall will come in at some point, but in the meantime, it's a very difficult process to explain to them because they're looking for somebody who's both experienced at Goldman Sachs or has run Blackstone, and yet at the same time has been based in Tashkent for the last 20 years. Which it's two skill sets which don't yet combine at this point in time. But in the future, hopefully it'll be there.
Michael, if you want to jump in on that, and then Ed, talk about what turns on venture capitalists?
Just 2 points. You know, Paul's the expert here. I think the explanation, if you talk about what burden is on the companies, the venture companies, and venture, by the way, means a lot of things. Maybe it's just an innovative technology in a traditional industry that could be viewed as new. So I think if the explanation is key. You know, we joke, a lot of the guys up here will know, in banking, it's sort of if you can't explain the financial structure on a cocktail napkin, it's too complicated. And I think the burden is on the companies. If you have a venture opportunity, it has to make sense to an audience that may not be otherwise prepared to understand it. And that's the salesman's job. That's the VC opportunity. In terms of diversification, I absolutely agree with Paul. Uzbekistan as a country is still a tough sell. It's new. It's 2 years into a transformative process. If you look through the lens of venture, which is typically a riskier, higher risk appetite, linking that entrepreneurial opportunity, say, across the region in a way that makes the risk seem more moderated or diversified. That's an interesting tactic. It's not necessarily window dressing, can be accurate, but pointing to an expansion of your business, pointing to how it relates regionally, point to countries that are better known, Ukraine, Russia. There's certainly links you can draw there that make it more digestible, I think.
Thank you. Ed?
I take it part of the question is how do you set up the professional structures that you need in order to have a good banking system, and to that I would say expatriates. People who have gone abroad, have worked in sophisticated systems that do work, and where you have advanced economies, and to have a climate where they really want to come back and to be part of making Uzbekistan a fast-growing, a solid place for people to invest. It's not necessarily the natural resources. China has some great natural resources. But they did have a great expat community that could come back and be helpful to them, both in funding along their own way and also the professionalism that they needed. I think the key is the expats.
Take one more question right here. We're coming down to our last few minutes, so please be concise.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Hikmat Abdurrahmanov. I come from the field of international trade and business development. And I would like to address a question of state-owned enterprises and privatization in general. It seems there is a strong understanding from the side of the government that we need to go through this process now. We need to privatize state-owned enterprises. And we see that there's a huge, big domination of state in many fields. We can name a financial system with 80+% of government still being the main player, airline industry, mining, and you name it. Very many various directions. So my question would be, if we realize that this has to be done, what would be your advice on how this should be done? What would you put in the priority, in the to-do list of the government, what exactly it has to do? Maybe one or two of specific advices that you would give. Thank you.
Michael, we'll start with you.
It's a good question. It's obviously a big topic. Look, I have to go back to some of the original remarks. It's all about expectation and clarity of process. I'm telling you, just give people an understanding of the likely path. Don't exaggerate, don't obfuscate. And, as I said before, everyone realizes this takes time. Nobody's looking for a quick fix. Paul said it, we're waiting. We're here because we know it's going to happen. But a methodical process to this privatization is critical. Decision makers identified, structure identified, equal opportunities across sectors and industries, no favoritism. It's very basic stuff that has to be ordered.
Yeah, fully agree, and you have to make sure that when you're ready, that's where you're going to do it, because these assets will migrate from the state to the few oligarchs, and that's going to be it. So you have to prepare the groundwork and then do it.
Yeah, Paul?
Just two words of advice. The world has a pretty long history of privatization now, 50 years or so since the UK started in the 70s, and then in this part of the world, 20, 25 years. There have been a lot of mistakes, a lot of roads that we've taken, and I would say very much learn from those mistakes. And for me, if you're talking about a foreign investor coming in to buy in, it's alignment of incentives. Can't be a sweetheart deal. It's usually better if the state has a stake or local stakeholders are invested. Best of all is when you can do a local capital markets issue, like either a bond or a share issue, So it's diversified, and the local population can also benefit from it. But alignment of interests.
Ed?
You're all probably aware of the Chubais process in the initial privatization with respect to Russia. And the theme was, if we don't get it all out in 9 months, we're dead. And we know how that ended up in Russia. The Chinese have done it in a better way, and that is you keep your state-owned enterprises, you try and shape them up when they are ready to be subject. You get intelligent, sophisticated capital to invest in them with power to shape them up, get them in a position where they can then go public and have the public markets put more pressure on them to become more efficient, and done gradually like that. And meanwhile, have a business climate where entrepreneurs can build their own competing businesses, and then let that competition be free and open, and that will discipline the state-owned enterprises.
We're down to the last 30 seconds. Laziz, you get it.
Yeah, the privatization process should be transparent. This is the main principle. That is why we invited the World Bank, the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, to assist us to make this process as transparent as possible. We have announced 29 first enterprises to be sold to investors. This will take 2 or 3 years for them to prepare them, to make them consistent with international standards, reporting, financial reporting, etc. And we'll do IPOs, SPOs, so we have a bunch of mechanisms to do it. And I hope with the support of the international financial institutions, we would make it as efficient as possible.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've just had a primer in what works and what doesn't work in foreign investment. Please join me in thanking this exceptional panel. And I'm sure they'd be happy to take other questions. If you want to get specific information about their activities, they're here, and my guess is they're prepared to talk to you in greater depth. Apart from that, we are adjourned. Thank you.